The sand was wrong. Lieutenant Caleb Thorne knew it the moment his M3 scout car crested the dune. The tracks were too fresh, too deliberate. The kind of marks left by vehicles that weren't running, but waiting. February 1942, the Libyan desert stretched in every direction like a sea of broken glass. Heat shimmers rose from the sand, turning the horizon into liquid. Thorne's patrol, 5 armored cars, 23 men, had been moving east for 6 hours, following German supply routes that intelligence said would be empty. Intelligence was wrong. The first shell came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It punched through the lead scout car's thin armor like paper, and the vehicle erupted in a fountain of flame and black smoke. Thorne didn't hear the explosion. His mind registered the flash, the sudden absence of Lieutenant Morrison's voice on the radio, the way the burning vehicle seemed to hang in the air for a moment before settling into the sand. Then the world became noise. 20mm autocannon fire ripped across the formation from 3 sides. The German SDKFZ 222 armored cars had been hull down behind the dunes, invisible, patient. Now they moved like predators, their turrets tracking smoothly, their guns chattering in short, precise bursts. Thorne's gunner, a kid from Ohio named Patterson, swung their .50 caliber machine gun toward the nearest German vehicle and opened fire. The heavy bullets sparked off the enemy's armor like fireflies, ineffective, useless. The German gunner didn't even flinch. He simply adjusted his aim and fired back. The autocannon rounds walked up the sand toward Thorne's position. He felt them more than saw them. Impact tremors through the desert floor, getting closer, closer. His driver, Corporal Hayes, was already throwing the scout car into reverse, trying to get hull down, trying to get to cover that didn't exist. The second American vehicle died screaming. Thorne watched it happen in his peripheral vision, a clean hit to the engine compartment, fuel igniting, men trying to bail out through flames. Only one made it. He ran 6 steps before the autocannon fire cut him down. "We can't hurt them!" Patterson was shouting, still firing, still wasting ammunition on armor his gun couldn't penetrate. "Lieutenant, we can't hurt them!" Thorne keyed his radio. "All units, break contact. Northwest, full speed, now!" The third scout car tried. Its driver gunned the engine, throwing up a rooster tail of sand, attempting to use speed and distance to survive. The German crews were professionals. They led the target, calculated the deflection, fired. The American vehicle slewed sideways, hit in the engine, hit in the crew compartment, hit again and again until it stopped moving entirely. 4 vehicles left, 3 now. The Germans were repositioning, flanking, cutting off retreat angles. They moved with the confidence of hunters who knew their prey was unarmed. Hayes somehow found an escape route, a shallow wadi that offered cover for maybe 30 seconds. They plunged into it, the scout car's suspension bottoming out, men grabbing hold of anything bolted down. Behind them, the 4th American vehicle wasn't as lucky, or as fast, or perhaps the Germans had simply decided who would die in what order. The autocannon fire was clinical, professional, final. Thorne's scout car burst out of the wadi, doing 40 miles per hour, engines screaming, Hayes driving like the devil was on their heels, which wasn't far from the truth. The 5th American vehicle followed, trailing smoke from a glancing hit, but still mobile, still running. They ran for 11 miles before Thorne was sure they weren't being pursued. When Hayes finally slowed, both scout cars pulled into a defensive position behind a rock formation that wouldn't stop a determined rifle shot, let alone an autocannon. Thorne climbed out. His legs didn't want to work properly. He looked back the way they'd come. 5 columns of black smoke rose into the desert sky, marking the graves of 18 men. The other surviving vehicle's commander, a sergeant named Kellerman, walked over. His face was grey. 4 minutes, he said. Contact to combat ineffective in 4 minutes. Thorne didn't reply. There was nothing to say. They'd done everything right. Proper spacing, proper intervals, proper reconnaissance procedures. None of it mattered. The Germans had better guns, better armor, better vehicles. The American scout cars might as well have been made of tin foil and hope. Patterson appeared at Thorne's elbow. The gunner's hands were shaking. "Sir, I hit that first Kraut car maybe 50 times. 50 times, didn't even scratch the paint." "I know. What are we supposed to do?" "They can kill us from ranges we can't even fight back. It's not war, sir. It's murder." Thorne looked at the smoke columns again. Morrison had been 26. Had a kid back home he'd never met, born while the battalion was in transit. Now that kid would grow up with photographs instead of a father. "Get on the radio," Thorne said quietly. "Tell headquarters we need immediate evac. And tell them," he paused, "tell them reconnaissance in this sector is no longer viable, not with current equipment." The response from headquarters was terse. "Hold position. New orders coming." They held position for 14 hours, waiting for German patrols that never came, watching the smoke fade into the desert dusk. When relief finally arrived, it brought a colonel Thorne had never met, and orders that made even less sense than usual. "You're being rotated stateside, Lieutenant," the colonel said. "Medical evaluation. Combat stress." Thorne almost laughed. Almost. "Sir, I'm fine. My men are fine. We just need equipment that doesn't get us killed." "That's above my pay grade, son. Orders are orders." 6 days later, Thorne stood on American soil for the first time in 8 months. The doctors at the hospital in Norfolk, Virginia, examined him, declared him physically healthy but emotionally traumatized, and prescribed rest. He spent 3 days in a clean bed, eating food that didn't taste like sand, trying not to see Patterson's face every time he closed his eyes. On the 4th day, he received a visitor he wasn't expecting. Major Hendricks was a staff officer, the kind who spent wars behind desks. He sat down across from Thorne in the hospital's day room and opened a folder. "Your after-action report made interesting reading, Lieutenant." "I wrote what happened, sir. 18 men killed in action, 23 engaged, casualty rate of 78%. Hendricks looked up. "In 4 minutes." "Yes, sir." "Want to know something that'll really ruin your day?" Hendricks didn't wait for an answer. "Reconnaissance casualties across all theaters are running at 34%. 34. Highest of any combat specialty. You know why?" Thorne said nothing. "Because we're sending boys out in vehicles that can't fight back. We're asking them to observe the enemy, report enemy positions, and oh, by the way, if you encounter enemy armor, you're supposed to run, except German armor can usually catch our scouts, and when they catch them, it's a slaughter. Then give us better vehicles." "We're trying." Hendricks closed the folder. "Problem is, everyone says it can't be done. Tank gun on an armored car, too heavy, too much recoil, transmission would fail, chassis would crack. The laws of physics say you can have speed or you can have firepower, but you can't have both. Physics didn't save my men, Major." "No, it didn't." Hendricks stood. "Rest up, Lieutenant. We're assigning you to a new project. Training duty should be nice and safe." No, the training duty turned out to be neither nice nor safe. It was Fort Knox, Kentucky, and the heat was different but just as oppressive. Thorne spent his days teaching fresh-faced 20-year-olds how to read maps and call artillery and survive their first contact with the enemy. He spent his nights trying not to think about the ones who wouldn't. 3 months passed. June became, July became August. The war ground on without him. Reports from North Africa grew worse. Rommel was pushing toward Egypt. American reconnaissance units continued to die at rates that made staff officers uncomfortable and frontline soldiers fatalistic. Then, in late August, Thorne read a newspaper article that changed everything. It was page 6 of the Louisville Courier-Journal, a tiny piece, barely 3 paragraphs. The headline read, "Detroit bicycle maker promises wonder weapon." The article was dismissive, almost mocking. Harrison Motors, a company that employed 200 people making bicycles and motorcycles, claimed to have designed an armoured car that could fight like a tank and move like the wind. The army had declined to comment. Industry experts called it publicity-seeking. Thorne read it 3 times, then he requested a weekend pass. Detroit was sweltering. The industrial smell, oil and metal and smoke, reminded Thorne uncomfortably of burning vehicles. He found Harrison Motors in a neighborhood that had seen better decades, a 3-story brick building wedged between a machine shop and a shuttered restaurant. The receptionist looked surprised when he walked in wearing his dress uniform. "Can I help you, Lieutenant?" "I'd like to speak with whoever designed your armored car." She blinked. "That would be Mr. Ashford, but he's—" "I'll wait." Everett Ashford appeared 20 minutes later, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had probably been white sometime in 1935. He was 42, balding, with the kind of permanent squint that came from years spent reading technical drawings in poor light. "You're here about the Wolverine," Ashford said. "Not a question. If that's what you're calling it. Come on." Ashford led him through the factory floor, past assembly lines where workers were building motorcycle frames, into a back warehouse that had been converted into something between a workshop and a cathedral. In the center, spotlit by afternoon sun through dirty windows, sat the most beautiful armored car Thorne had ever seen. It was low-slung, aggressive, with a turret that looked too large for the chassis. 4 wheels, independent suspension, armor sloped at angles that suggested someone had actually thought about deflection. The gun was a 37mm, the same weapon fitted to Stuart light tanks. "Jesus," Thorne breathed. "She's a beaut, isn't she?" Ashford patted the hood like it was a favorite dog. "Pre-selector gearbox, fluid flywheel coupling, 5 forward gears and 5 reverse. You can move just as fast backward as forward. Useful if someone's shooting at you." The gun, 37mm, same penetration as a tank. Better, actually, because we're lighter, so muzzle velocity is higher. Ashford climbed onto the vehicle, gestured for Thorne to follow. "See this? Independent suspension on all 4 wheels. We can climb a 50% grade. Try that in your standard scout car." Thorne ran his hand along the armor. Thickness: 16mm frontal, proof against 20mm autocannon at combat ranges.
The army rejected this? Ashford's expression soured. "Didn't reject it, tested it. Aberdeen Proving Grounds last April, catastrophic failure. Transmission exploded after 5 shots. Chassis cracked. Recoil management was non-existent. They wrote fundamentally flawed design in the report and sent me packing." "But you fixed it." "Spent 3 months redesigning everything from the ground up. New transmission mounts, hydraulic recoil buffers, reinforced chassis. This is version 2.
"Haven't tested it yet because the army won't return my calls." Thorne climbed into the turret. The gunner's position was cramped but functional. The sight picture was good. The ammunition storage, he counted the racks, would hold enough for a sustained engagement. Everything about it screamed that someone had actually listened to what combat scouts needed instead of what engineers thought they needed. "How many can you build?" Thorne asked. "With current facilities, maybe 40 a month if we go full production, but that's not going to happen because I want to test it." Ashford stared at him. "You're serious?" "I lost 18 men in 4 minutes because they couldn't fight back. If this thing works, if it can actually do what you say it can do, then yes, I'm deadly serious. It's not approved, it's not in any procurement pipeline. The army thinks I'm a crackpot bicycle maker who doesn't understand physics." Thorne climbed down from the turret. "Then let's prove them wrong. You get this vehicle to Aberdeen. I'll get the army to watch." "How?" "I know a general who owes me a favor." That wasn't quite true. Thorne knew a general who felt guilty about Tunisia. Close enough. "One test, that's all I'm asking. Let's show them what's possible." Ashford studied him for a long moment. Then he stuck out his grease-stained hand. Everett Ashford, Caleb Thorne. They shook on it. Neither of them knew it yet, but that handshake would change the war. Getting the test approved took 6 weeks of bureaucratic warfare that made actual combat seem straightforward. Forms, channels, memorandums, Thorne used every favor he had, called in every debt, and made promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The general, Patton, newly promoted and bound for bigger things, made exactly one phone call. That was all it took. October 15th, 1942, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland. Cool morning, clear sky, the kind of day that belonged in a painting instead of a battlefield. The Wolverine sat on the test range, squat and businesslike. Around it, a collection of officers who ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. The chief testing officer, a colonel named Matheson, had made his position clear before they'd even begun. "Mr. Ashford, your previous test resulted in catastrophic mechanical failure. Give me one reason we shouldn't scrub this and save everyone's time."
Guy Ashford, wearing coveralls instead of a suit, simply pointed at the vehicle. "Because we fixed it." The test protocol was brutal. 50 rounds, rapid fire, simulating combat conditions. If the transmission survived, they'd move to mobility trials. If the chassis held, they'd test the armor. If everything worked, they'd run it against German equipment captured in North Africa. Thorne volunteered as gunner. Ashford tried to object. "You're an officer. Let one of the enlisted men." But Thorne was already climbing into the turret. "If it fails," he said quietly, "I want to know why." The driver was a test specialist named Kowalski, professional, competent, the kind of man who'd driven every vehicle the army had ever fielded and wasn't impressed by any of them. He settled into his seat, familiarized himself with the pre-selector gearbox, and nodded. "Ready when you are, Lieutenant?"
They. Thorne loaded the first round. 37mm armor piercing, the same shell that Stuart tanks used to kill German armor. His hands remembered the motion from training that felt like a lifetime ago. The target was a captured SDKFZ-222, the same type of vehicle that had massacred his patrol in Tunisia. It sat 400 yards downrange, angled to present maximum armor. Thorne settled his eye against the sight, adjusted for range, breathed. "Fire!" The gun spoke. The recoil was immediate, violent, but controlled. The hydraulic buffers did their job. The chassis flexed, but didn't crack. Through the sight, Thorne watched the armor-piercing round strike the German vehicle dead center and punch completely through. Around the test range, officers went silent. "Again," someone said. "Might have been Matheson, might have been God." Thorne fired again, and again, and again. The Wolverine's gun barked out round after round, each one finding its target, each one proving that physics didn't care what conventional wisdom said. The transmission held, the chassis held, the gun mount stayed true. 50 rounds, 50 hits, 0 malfunctions. When the smoke cleared, the captured German vehicle looked like it had been used for artillery practice, which, in a sense, it had. Matheson walked down to the Wolverine. His expression was unreadable. He looked at the vehicle, at Ashford, at Thorne still sitting in the gunner's seat. "How soon can you begin production?" Ashford blinked. "Sir?" "The Army is prepared to order 500 units for immediate deployment. How soon can you begin production?" We'd need to expand facilities, hire more workers, secure raw materials. 6 months minimum to..." "You have 3 months. Get it done." That was October. By November, Harrison Motors had hired 200 additional workers and begun the scramble to convert a bicycle factory into an armaments manufacturer. By December, they had a problem no one had anticipated: the Luftwaffe. The bombing raid came on a Tuesday night. German bombers penetrating American airspace in what would later be called one of the war's most daring strikes hit industrial targets across Detroit. Harrison Motors wasn't the primary target, That distinction belonged to the tank factories and steel mills, but proximity was enough. Thorne got the call at 2 a.m. He was at Fort Knox, preparing to ship out to a new assignment, when the phone in the officer's quarters rang with news that made his stomach drop. "Harrison Motors is gone, sir. Direct hit. Building's a total loss." He caught the first train to Detroit. The journey took 14 hours. He spent every minute of it thinking about Ashford, about the Wolverine, about 500 vehicles that the Army was counting on and that now existed only as melted metal and ash. The factory was still smoking when he arrived. Firefighters had given up trying to save anything. They were just keeping the flames from spreading. Thorne stood across the street, watching his second chance burn. Ashford found him there an hour later. The engineer's face was soot-stained, exhausted, but his eyes were clear. "The main building's gone," Ashford said. "All the assembly equipment, most of the tools, the prototype vehicles." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Ashford pulled out a rolled set of papers from inside his coat. "I've got the blueprints. Memorized them anyway, but having paper helps. And I've already made calls." "Calls to who?" "Anyone who'll listen. There's a textile mill in Ohio with floor space we can use. Underwear factory in Michigan has metalworking equipment. Friend of mine runs an assembly plant in Grand Rapids. We'll scatter production across 4 sites. Harder to bomb, harder to disrupt." Thorne stared at him. "You're serious? Those boys in North Africa need vehicles that won't get them killed. We promised them 500. I don't break promises." It took 6 weeks to get production started. 6 weeks of 18-hour days, of scrambling for materials, of teaching textile workers how to rivet armor plate. Ashford worked himself to exhaustion, then worked another shift. Thorne, officially reassigned to liaise between Harrison Motors and the Army, spent his days solving problems that ranged from steel shortages to union disputes. By January 1943, the first Wolverine rolled off the improvised assembly line. It was ugly, mismatched paint, some components salvaged from the destroyed factory, but it worked. By March, they were producing 30 vehicles a month. By May, they hit their stride. 50 vehicles a month, quality control improving, workers who'd never seen an armored car before now, building them with the precision of craftsmen. In June, the Army ordered another 1,000 units, and on June 15, 1943, Lieutenant Caleb Thorne received new orders. Report to the 7th Reconnaissance Squadron, currently forming at Fort Benning, Georgia. Assignment, Commander, 1st Wolverine Platoon. Destination, Sicily. Fort Benning was reorganization and reassignment. Patterson and Hayes rotated to other units, Patterson to Tank Destroyer School where his combat experience would make him an instructor, Hayes to a training command stateside. Both had earned it. Both deserved to survive. Thorne's new crew came recommended. Sergeant Warren Bridger, 28, ex-Detroit mechanic who'd maintained M3 Scouts in North Africa and volunteered specifically for the Wolverine program when he heard what it could do. Private Leland Garrison, 21, fresh from gunnery school with scores that suggested natural talent and an intensity that reminded Thorne of himself at that age. They met 3 days before embarkation. Bridger shook hands with the confidence of a man who knew machines intimately. Garrison had the nervous energy of someone who'd never been shot at but desperately wanted to prove himself. "Sir," Garrison said, "I heard about Tunisia, about what happened to your patrol." "Then you know why we're here," Thorne replied, "to make sure it doesn't happen again." Bridger walked around the Wolverine like a man inspecting a prize horse. He climbed into the driver's position, studied the pre-selector gearbox, tested the controls. When he emerged, he was grinning. "This is gorgeous engineering, sir. Whoever designed this transmission understood what drivers actually need." "Bicycle maker from Detroit," Thorne said. "Best damn bicycle maker in the world, then." He stood in the Harrison Motors parking lot, the new one, temporary, gravel instead of pavement, and looked at the 4 Wolverines his platoon would take to war. They weren't perfect, they weren't invincible, but they were better than anything American scouts had ever had. Ashford walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. The engineer looked older than he had 8 months ago. The war did that. "Take care of them, Lieutenant. They'll take care of you." Thorne extended his hand. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank Patterson. Thank Morrison. Thank all the boys who died because we didn't give them the tools to fight back." Ashford's grip was firm. Make sure their deaths meant something. 3 days later, Thorne and his platoon boarded a transport ship bound for North Africa. The Wolverines went into the hold, secured with chains and prayers. The men went topside, watching America fade into the distance. War was waiting for them across the ocean, but this time they had the means to fight back. Sicily announced itself with the smell of cordite and burning olive trees. July 10th, 1943. Operation Husky, the largest amphibious invasion in history, and Thorne's platoon was part of it. 4 Wolverines, 16 men, loaded onto landing craft that pitched and rolled in the Mediterranean swell. Thorne stood on deck watching the coast emerge from pre-dawn darkness. Beside him, Sergeant Warren Bridger, 28, ex-Detroit mechanic, checked his equipment for the 3rd time. In the turret, Private Leland Garrison, 21 and fresh from gunnery school, tried to look confident and failed. "Nervous?" Thorne asked Garrison. "Sir, training is different than—" "Yes, it is. Stay calm. Trust your training. Trust Bridger's driving." Thorne paused. "Trust the vehicle." The landing at Geller was controlled chaos. Shells falling, tracers arcing across the beach, men dying in the surf. The Wolverines rolled off into 3 feet of water, engines roaring. Bridger drove like a man possessed, finding firm sand, avoiding obstacles, getting them inland before German artillery could zero in. By nightfall, the beachhead held. Barely. Colonel Whitmore found Thorne after midnight. The battalion commander spread a map across the Wolverine's hood, his expression hard. "German reconnaissance has been probing our eastern flank. SDKFZ 222S, maybe half tracks. Tomorrow at first light, I want you to find them and kill them." Whitmore looked up. "I'm tired of our scouts running, Lieutenant. Show me these vehicles can actually fight." First light came cold and clear. Thorne's platoon moved east in diamond formation through countryside that would have been beautiful if it wasn't trying to kill them. Garrison sat in the turret, hands on the 37mm, trying to watch everywhere at once. "Contact," Bridger said quietly. 11 o'clock, ridgeline. Through binoculars, Thorne counted 7 German armored cars and 3 half-tracks, an entire reconnaissance company moving with the confidence of hunters who'd never been challenged. "All units, enemy armor, 11 o'clock, range 800 yards. Battle formation, gunners weapons free." The Wolverines spread out. The German commander spotted them, vehicles hesitating as they tried to identify what they were seeing. American scout cars didn't look like this, didn't move like this. "Garrison," Thorne said. "Lead vehicle, 450 yards. Identified." The kid's voice was steadier than Thorne expected. "Ready? Fire." The 37mm cracked. The armor-piercing round struck the lead SDKFZ below the turret and punched clean through. The German vehicle staggered, smoke erupting, then the ammunition cooked off in a fireball that threw the turret skyward. Garrison stared through his sight. "Sir, You did, again. Next target." The other Wolverines opened fire. 4 guns, 4 targets, mathematics and murder. A half-track exploded. An SDKFZ took a round through the engine and died. The Germans scattered, returning fire with 20mm autocannons that sparked off Wolverine armor without penetrating. "Bridger, back us up 50 yards. The Wolverine rolled backward at 40 miles per hour, smooth as glass, while Garrison kept firing. Load, aim, shoot. The pre-selector gearbox made it look easy. 4 minutes after first contact, 6 German vehicles were burning. 1 SDKFZ escaped, trailing smoke. 0 American losses. Thorne climbed out on legs that shook. Garrison appeared, face pale. "Sir, the vehicle I hit, the first one, it had markings." Thorne had seen them too, German tactical numbers partially obscured by desert camouflage. The same unit that had massacred his patrol in Tunisia 14 months ago. Not the exact vehicle, but close enough. "Good shooting, Private." Colonel Whitmore arrived with signals intelligence. They'd intercepted the German commander's last transmission. "Unknown American vehicle, heavy gun, extremely dangerous, recommend." The message ended there. Whitmore was smiling. "Make them keep asking, Lieutenant." Sicily proved it. Italy made it doctrine. The invasion at Salerno in September was desperate fighting. The beachhead nearly collapsed twice. Thorne's platoon engaged everything from armored cars to assault guns. Once a Panzer III wandered into their sector and learned that 37mm guns could penetrate side armor. Bridger perfected what he called the dance. Engage, fire 3 rounds, reverse at maximum speed while Garrison reloaded. The Germans would pursue, but the Wolverine's 5 reverse gears meant it could outrun vehicles designed to be faster. At safe distance, stop, fire again, repeat, shoot and scoot. The kind of warfare armored cars were meant for, but rarely survived. Monte Cassino was hell frozen in mud. The Gustav Line held the Allies for 5 brutal months. Reconnaissance meant minefields, artillery, accepting that patrols might not return. But they kept returning. Garrison became an ace. 17 confirmed kills by January 1944. Bridger could drive through terrain that stopped tanks. Thorne learned to read ground, like prophecy, finding routes that kept his men breathing. Then, in February 1944, Everett Ashford appeared. The engineer looked exhausted, wearing a civilian coat that had seen better years. He found Thorne at a maintenance depot, gestured to a truck filled with metal cylinders packed in straw. "Little John adapters, squeeze-bore tungsten penetrators, fit right onto your gun barrels." Thorne picked one up. Precisely machined, heavier than it looked. "What does it do?" "Increases armor penetration 40%. Compresses the tungsten core as it leaves the barrel. Higher velocity, better penetration. You can punch through armor that laughs at standard rounds." "How many?" Ashford's face darkened. 200 total. Tungsten is scarce. What you get is what there is." They tested one the next day. Captured Panzer IV hull, 600 yards, range where standard 37mm would bounce off. Garrison loaded the tungsten round, seated the adapter, fired. The round went through frontal armor like cardboard. Clean penetration, catastrophic internal damage. Garrison stared. "Sir, that's impossible." "Apparently not." Word spread fast. Wolverine crews requested the adapters. Ashford distributed carefully. 20 rounds per vehicle, use only when necessary. The tungsten was too precious to waste, but when a Panzer appeared where scouts had no business encountering Panzers, the Little John adapter transformed the Wolverine from scout into tank killer. D-Day happened without them. They were still in Italy. But on June 9th, 12 Wolverines loaded onto LSTs in Naples and sailed for France. Normandy was a different war. The Bocage, hedgerow country, was nightmare terrain. Every field a potential kill zone. Every hedgerow hiding Panzerfausts or anti-tank guns. First week, 3 Wolverines hit mines. Not destroyed, but damaged. Crews survived. Vehicles went to depot. Replacements came forward. The hedgerows themselves were the problem. 12 feet high, centuries old, roots deep as foundations. You couldn't drive through them, couldn't see over them. Only the lanes between, and if Germans waited there. Bridger solved it with a welding torch and scrap metal from a destroyed Sherman. A crude steel wedge mounted on the front bumper, the Bocage blade. It didn't cut hedgerows, it tore them. Suddenly, wolverines weren't confined to lanes. They could move cross-country, use hedgerows for cover instead of being trapped. Colonel Whitmore saw a demonstration and ordered blades for every wolverine in theatre. Still, some situations demanded different innovation. Bridger proposed removing turrets from mine-damaged vehicles, creating low-profile scout variants. Lower silhouette, harder to spot. Thorne approved. By August, the squadron had 4 turretless wolverines, each crewed by drivers trusted not to get killed. Early September. The plan was bold. Reconnaissance units would slip through German lines and secure bridges over the Rhine tributaries before they could be demolished. Thorne's target, Colmar, a city in Alsace, strategic and symbolic. September 8, 1944. Dawn breaking over rolling countryside. 4 wolverines moving fast through territory that should have been cleared. They entered Colmar's outskirts at 0740 hours. The streets were too quiet. The ambush erupted from 3 sides simultaneously. Pumas, German 8-wheeled armored cars with 50mm guns that could kill Shermans. 3 of them, hull down behind rubble, waiting. The first shot missed Thorne's wolverine by inches. Bridger was already reversing, engines screaming. Garrison traversed, seeking targets, but the Pumas held every advantage. All units, contact. Pumas, multiple. The second shot hit, a glancing blow off frontal armor that rang through the hull like a bell. Warning shot. Next one would penetrate. Bridger, hard left, basement access. Garrison, smoke. The Wolverines slewed sideways, crashing through a gate, down a ramp into what had been a wine cellar. Smoke grenades popped, filling the street with white fog. The other Wolverines scattered into Colmar's maze. The Pumas had them pinned. Superior guns, superior armor, superior positions. But Thorne had Corporal Jensen, who spoke fluent German. And an idea. For 4 hours, Jensen broadcast fake radio traffic on German frequencies. Phantom tank companies, artillery batteries that were actually miles away. Casualty reports and urgent reinforcement requests, carefully crafted to suggest Americans were flooding into Colmar with heavy armor. The Germans monitored enemy communications when possible. Always. At 1340 hours, the Pumas withdrew. Thorne waited 30 minutes before emerging. The street was empty. Germans had pulled back to face armor that didn't exist. "Sir," Garrison said, "that was either brilliant or insane. Ask me in an hour." They secured the bridges, all 3. By evening, when main American forces entered Colmar, the 7th Reconnaissance Squadron controlled the crossings that would let the advance continue. French civilians emerged at dusk. Thousands flooding streets, weeping and cheering, mobbing the Wolverines, old men who'd fought the last war, women who'd endured 4 years of occupation, children who'd never known freedom. They surrounded Thorne's vehicle, touching it like something sacred. Someone draped an American flag over the turret. Someone else handed up wine hidden since 1940. "Les Liberateurs!" they shouted. "The Wolverines!" Thorne stood in his turret, overwhelmed, trying to wave while watching for counterattacks. Bridger had tears on his face. Garrison was laughing for the first time since Sicily. Colonel Whitmore found them after midnight. "Hell of a job, Lieutenant." The colonel looked older, the war grinding him down. "Intelligence is calling your platoon the scouts who fight back. Not run, not hide, fight." Thorne thought about Ashford, back in Detroit, probably designing carburetors or lawnmowers now. "That bicycle maker built something special, sir." "Yes, he did. Make sure you write and tell him so." That night, in a commandeered apartment, Thorne wrote, "Dear Mr. Ashford, your vehicles saved my life again today, more times than I can count. The men trust them, the enemy fears them. Thank you for everything." He sealed it, gave it to a courier, Paris bound. Outside, Colmar was free, and the war ground on. But for one night, American scout cars had done the impossible. They'd hunted the hunters and won. May 3rd, 1945, Hamburg. The city was burning when Thorn's squadron entered it. Not from combat, the fighting was over, but from fires set days earlier that no one had bothered to extinguish. The Third Reich was dying, and Hamburg was one of its funeral pyres. Thorn's Wolverine rolled through streets that would have been familiar to anyone who'd seen Berlin or Dresden or any of the other German cities that had learned what total war meant. Rubble, collapsed buildings, civilians emerging from cellars with faces that had forgotten what peace looked like. The Rathaus, Hamburg's city hall, still stood somehow, scarred and pockmarked but defiant. Thorn parked his Wolverine in the plaza outside, next to a fountain that had run dry sometime in 1943. Around him, the rest of the 7th Reconnaissance Squadron was doing the same, marking the moment. The war in Europe was ending. Had ended, really, though the formal surrender wouldn't come for another few days. Bridger climbed out, stretched, and looked at the Wolverine like he was seeing it for the first time. 2 years, he said. Sicily to Hamburg. This thing never quit on us. Garrison joined them, no longer the scared 21-year-old who'd fired his first shot at Gila. He was 23 now, and his eyes were older than his face. How many, you think? Total kills? Thorn had kept count. Every commander did, even though the numbers felt obscene. Platoon! 47 confirmed, maybe another dozen probable. And we lost how many vehicles? 6. 3 to mines, 2 to 88mm guns, 1 to a Panzerfaust. Thorn ran his hand along the Wolverine's scarred armor. Every dent told a story. Every patch of replacement plate marked a moment when steel had stopped what would have been death. Could have been so much worse. Colonel Whitmore appeared, looking as exhausted as Thorn felt. The war had aged the colonel brutally. He'd been 52 in Sicily. Now he looked 70. Lieutenant, the final tallies are coming in. Thought you'd want to know. And Whitmore consulted a clipboard that had somehow survived 2 years of combat. Total Wolverine production, 2,247 vehicles. Combat losses across all theaters, 418. Kill ratio, 3.8 to 1. Crew casualties, 8.2% compared to 34% for the old M3 Scouts. Whitmore looked up. Your bicycle maker saved a lot of lives, Thorn. Yes, sir, he did. The colonel hesitated, then added, Army's already planning the replacement, something called the T-48, bigger, heavier, 6 wheels, supposed to make the Wolverine obsolete. Thorn said nothing. He'd heard rumors. New designs, better designs. The Wolverine had done its job. Now it would be replaced by something shinier. That was how progress worked. Except progress sometimes forgot that better on paper and better in combat weren't the same thing. August 1945. Fort Knox, Kentucky. Thorn was processing out, turning in equipment, signing forms, preparing to become a civilian again after 4 years of war. The atomic bombs had fallen. Japan had surrendered. It was over. He was in the supply depot when he ran into Major Hendricks, the same staff officer who'd sent him to Detroit 3 years earlier. Lieutenant, or should I say Captain? Hendricks nodded at Thorn's new rank insignia. Congratulations on the promotion. Thank you, sir, though it came a bit late to matter. Everything in the army comes late. Speaking of which, you hear about the T-48. Thorn shook his head. Aberdeen's running comparative tests. New hotness versus old reliable. The brass wants to justify why they're spending money on the replacement. Hendricks grinned. Word is, it's not going well. For the T-48, I mean. Sir, your Wolverine's beating it. Speed trials, armor trials, reliability trials. The 6-wheel drive sounds good until you realize it's heavier, slower, and the transmission can't handle the weight. They're running one more full evaluation in January. If the T-48 fails, Hendricks shrugged. Politics is a strange beast. January 1946. Aberdeen Proving Grounds. The test report was classified, but Thorne had friends who owed him favors. He read it in a bar in Baltimore, nursing a beer he wasn't really tasting. T-48. Armored Car, Comparative Evaluation. Final Report. Summary. The T-48 fails to demonstrate significant improvement over the existing M24 Wolverine in 7 of 10 evaluated categories. Specific deficiencies include mobility, T-48 cross-country speed 15% slower despite larger engine. Six-wheel drive creates maintenance complications without corresponding performance benefit. Reliability. T-48 transmission failures occurred in 23% of test runs. M24 Wolverine, 0 transmission failures over identical course. Crew survivability. T-48 higher profile increases vulnerability. Armor thickness improvements offset by larger target silhouette. Production cost. T-48 unit cost 340% higher than M24 due to complexity of six-wheel drive system. Recommendation. T-48 production authorization should be reconsidered. M24 Wolverine remains adequate for reconnaissance requirements. Thorne read it twice. Then he folded the report and tucked it in his jacket. The bicycle maker's crazy idea, the vehicle everyone said was impossible, had just beaten the Army's official replacement. The vehicle designed to be obsolete had outlasted its own successor. Everett Ashford deserved to know. The letter reached Detroit a week later. Ashford's reply came back in March. Dear Captain Thorne, it read in precise engineer's handwriting. Your news about the T-48 test results is gratifying, though not surprising. Good design is good design, regardless of who builds it. But I must share something that troubles me. Harrison Motors is shutting down armored vehicle production. The war is over, and the Army has cancelled all outstanding contracts. We're going back to motorcycles and lawnmowers. I spent 5 years building something that mattered, and now I'm designing carburetors again. Perhaps this is how it should be. But I confess, I miss the work. I miss knowing that what I built made a difference. Take care of yourself, Captain, and if you're ever in Detroit, the door is always open. Yours, Everett Ashford. Thorne wrote back, but the letter was returned 6 months later. Addressee moved, no forwarding address. He tried calling, the number was disconnected. Life moved on. The Wolverines, meanwhile, refused to die. In 1947, the State Department began foreign military sales. Surplus American equipment, sold or given to allies who needed it. The M24 Wolverines found eager buyers. Britain took 200 and purchased them for colonial service. France took 90. Greece, still fighting a civil war, took 65. South Korea, newly independent and nervous about the North, took 83. The vehicles scattered across the globe, carrying American engineering and Ashford's legacy to places he'd never imagined. Korea saw combat again in 1950. The 63rd ROK Cavalry, equipped with Wolverines, provided reconnaissance for American forces pushing north. The vehicles were 7 years old by then, but they still worked, still fought. Malaysia, 1948 through 1960. British forces hunting insurgents in jungle terrain. The Wolverines proved perfect for the work. Small enough for jungle tracks, powerful enough to win firefights, reliable enough to keep running in conditions that killed more sophisticated vehicles. India, 1962. The brief, brutal war with China in the Himalayas. Indian armored units included Wolverines operating at altitudes that would have killed lesser machines. The pre-selector gearbox that Ashford had designed for desert warfare worked just as well in mountain passes at 15,000 feet. And Sri Lanka, 12 Wolverines, transferred in 1959, used for internal security and ceremonial duties. The Sri Lankan military loved them. kept them running through the 1971 insurrection, through the civil war that followed, through decades when they should have been museum pieces. Some said Sri Lanka operated the last combat-ready Wolverine until 1996, 51 years after the war that birthed them. No one could confirm it, but no one could deny it either. October 14, 1998, Aberdeen, Maryland. Caleb Thorne was 80 years old, retired, living in a small house in Virginia with a wife who tolerated his war stories and grandchildren who pretended to listen. He'd been a postman for 30 years after the war. A quiet life, a good life. The phone call came on a Tuesday. "Captain Thorne? This is Dr. Rebecca Morrison from the U.S. Army Ordnance Museum. We've acquired something you need to see." 3 days later, Thorne stood in a museum warehouse, staring at a ghost. The Wolverine was battered, rust-scarred, painted in colors he didn't recognize, but the serial number was clear, 0127. His vehicle, the one he'd driven from Sicily to Hamburg, the one Bridger had coaxed through impossible terrain and Garrison had fired with deadly precision. Sri Lanka returned it last month, Dr. Morrison explained, part of a military equipment disposal program. It was still on their active roster until 1997, still operational. Thorne walked around the vehicle slowly, his hand trailing along armor that had saved his life more times than he could count. 53 years. This machine had survived 53 years of war and peace and everything between. "We're restoring it," Dr. Morrison continued. "Full working order. We thought you might want to be here when we open it up." They found the names carved inside the turret 2 days later. Crude letters scratched into metal with a bayonet or a knife. Thorne Bridger Garrison, 44. Thorne stared at his own handwriting from 54 years ago. He'd forgotten doing it. Some night in France, probably. Some moment when immortality seemed possible and death seemed far away. "We tracked down your crew," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "Sergeant Bridger is in Michigan. Private Garrison is in Texas. Both are willing to travel if you'd like a reunion." The three men met in the museum parking lot on a cold November morning. Bridger was 83, walking with a cane, still tall despite the stoop. Garrison was 76, heavier than Thorne remembered, with grandchildren who'd driven him from Houston. They stood looking at each other, these old men who'd been young together, who'd shared a war and survived it. Then Bridger grinned. "Sir, your vehicle's ready for inspection." They walked to the warehouse together, slowly, taking their time. Inside, the Wolverine waited. Museum staff had cleaned it, repaired the most obvious damage, but left it authentic. Scars and all. Thorne climbed into the commander's position. His body remembered how, even though his mind insisted this was impossible. Bridger settled into the driver's seat, his hands finding the controls like no time had passed. Garrison stood in the turret, looking through the gun sight at targets only he could see. 17 kills, Garrison said softly. "I remember every single one." "I remember the dance," Bridger added. "Shoot and scoot, forward and back. This transmission never failed us once." Thorne thought about Everett Ashford. The engineer had died in 1987, age 87, heart attack, sudden, gone before anyone could say goodbye. His daughter had donated his papers to MIT, his blueprints to the Smithsonian. Dr. Morrison had shown Thorne something interesting in those blueprints. The Wolverine's transmission design, the pre-selector gearbox, the fluid flywheel coupling, had been studied by British engineers in the 1950s. They'd used it as the basis for the Ferret armoured car, which served the British Army until the 1990s. 40 more years. Ashford's engineering had influenced 40 more years of armoured vehicle design. The bicycle maker from Detroit had changed how the world built Scouts. Thorne had tried to find Patterson and Hayes over the years. Patterson had made it through the war, taught at Aberdeen for a decade, then disappeared into civilian life somewhere in Ohio. Hayes had died in Korea. Different war, different vehicle, same outcome. Not everyone who survived the first war survived the second. He told me once, Thorne said, speaking to the vehicle as much as his crew, that he didn't build weapons, he built second chances. He gave us ours when we needed it most. The museum dedication ceremony was scheduled for December. They'd place the Wolverine in the main hall with a plaque explaining its service record. Sicily, Italy, France, Germany, Korea, Malaysia, India, Sri Lanka, a combat history that spanned 5 decades and 4 continents. But first, the 3 old men sat in their vehicle one last time, remembering when they'd been young and the war had seemed eternal, and this machine had been the difference between life and death. Only 38 left, Dr. Morrison had told them. Out of 2,247, the rest were used until they couldn't be used anymore. Thorne thought that was fitting. The Wolverine wasn't meant to be preserved, it was meant to be used, driven hard, fought hard, asked to do impossible things and somehow finding a way to do them. Like the men who'd crewed it, like the engineer who'd built it when everyone said it couldn't be built. Like the war that had demanded everything and been given everything willingly. Outside, afternoon was fading into evening. Inside the warehouse, 3 old men sat in silence, surrounded by ghosts of their younger selves, feeling the weight of history and survival and the strange grace of having made it through when so many hadn't. The scout who fought back. Still here, still remembered, still refusing to die.